Hi, everybody. We're telling Mike McKinley, you're the first person, so you get a wave. You get a wave. Elizabeth Young Consulting, you're the second person. I always like to shout out the first person that joins us on Home Together. Today is, what is today? It's Tuesday or Wednesday. Every day just falls into place. It's Wednesday, hump day. We're partway there. And I hope all of you are feeling pretty good today. I hope all of you are reminded that by staying at home, staying in place, sheltering in place, you're doing your country and your world a great public service. So I want to always remind you of that. You are doing something to help the world. You are doing something to help the essential workers who are working on the front lines of humanity, to help us all. So you are doing something productive and effective and helpful. So good for you, because I know for so many people it's really challenging. I know this time is really challenging for millions of people. Millions of people have filed for unemployment. Millions of people are homeschooling kids. Millions of people are caregiving elderly parents. It's tough all around. And that's why we do Home Together, to bring some joy, some inspiration, some uplifting news into your day. And we're so happy that so many of you have responded to it. So today I'm really excited because we're going to talk relationships, and you don't have to be in a relationship to be interested in what Mark Groves has to say. First and foremost, we're all in a relationship with ourselves, or at least we should be. I wasn't raised that way, to be in a relationship with yourself, to know yourself, to love yourself, to have compassion for yourself. But I've come to learn that that's critical, really important. It's something I stress to my children. Very important to learn how to be alone, be okay with being alone, love yourself. That's not selfish, that's not egotistical. It's just something you need to learn how to do, because you end up spending most of the time in your life with yourself. So you want to be good with yourself. Mark Groves was saying on his Instagram just today, I think it was, this is an invitation, a government invitation to spend some time with yourself. So take advantage of it, and don't be worried if you're not in a relationship, if you're not dating, if you're not running around doing all of that. It's okay. It's okay to be in a relationship with yourself. So now I'm joined by Patrick, who is in a beautiful relationship with himself and with Abby Champion. We should have Abby Champion join us one day.
Oh boy.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Abby!
Maybe you and Abby should do Home Together one time. Don't you think? Maybe that would be different, so everybody could see. This is Patrick, my son, Patrick Schwarzenegger. I'm Maria Shriver. You always like to say that we should introduce ourselves.
Yes, we should always introduce ourselves.
There's Create the Love. Mark Groves is already, he is really on time.
Prompt 2.
He is
2
prompt
p.m.
2.
He is here.
Before
Abby!
Don't yell. I want to just say how much I really appreciate Mark Groves. We had him on last week when Instagram crashed around the world. And so he's very kind to come back and join us again. And I am an avid watcher of his account. I listen to what he has to say. I've been very helped by his work. So that's why I thought it would be really helpful to others to hear from him. A lot of people hear from him, so he doesn't need us to help people hear from him. But just in case you haven't heard of him or you don't know him, Mark Groves is really inspiring and gives you very practical tips about how to survive coronas if you're in a relationship, and how to take advantage of this time if you are not in a relationship.
All right, should we bring him in?
Let's bring him in.
That was a great introduction.
Was that a good
Mark
introduction?
Groves? Yeah, crashes again on us.
No, please. He's in Canada, so we
He
don't.
is?
Yes, he's in Canada.
Oh, Marge.
He's in.
Margie.
There he is.
What's up? I think we did it.
We did it. You're back.
Last time we broke the internet. That's
I
good.
know.
Literally, it was us.
It was us.
Seriously, it was like the moment we started, the Instagram's like, we can't handle this.
I think I was in the middle of introducing myself last time, and then all of a sudden everything was down. So
and you thought it was us. You thought it was our internet, only to find out it was the world.
It was the world. But anyways, Mark, it's great to see you and great to meet you. I'm Patrick. I'm Maria's son. We got to meet briefly last time. So it's great to be able to talk with you again. My mom has been saying your name for, I told you last time, weeks and months. And I know you just wrote for the Sunday paper, my mom's website, and articles that come out every Sunday, which was really great to read that one and hear from you. And we can't wait to chat with you now.
So, well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm excited.
Yeah. So Mark, I was listening to your account this morning and you were saying that this is actually people write to you, they give you their issues, and that a lot of people are saying, oh my God, I can't date during the coronavirus. I'm staying at home. I'm anxious about that. And you said, what about taking this as an invitation, if you're not in a relationship, to actually be alone, to learn how to be alone? And I wanted to start there because one of the great qualities that we all need to be resilient, to come out of this time stronger than we went in, is the ability in life to be alone. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and why you think that's important?
Yeah, you know what, we are in our society and just culture evolution rewarded for being in a relationship. And we know that when you're single, people ask why you're single. So there's a real rewards for being in a relationship. And I think this really comes from, one, a survival need for them. And also that, you know, when you are in a relationship, there's evidence that someone chose you. So then there's this idea that you're someone who's worthy of being chosen. So our worth lives in our relationship status. So this then perpetuates this idea that when we're alone, if I seek someone out, if I can find completeness. And you remember that from Jerry Maguire, you know, that famous line. I think if we're old enough, we remember that line where he said, you complete me. And really this idea that our wholeness is completed by another individual. And I think this is really offering us this time, because of course, if you're healthy and happy being alone, then you can date through this time, of course. I'm not saying don't do that. But if you're struggling to just take a 2-month break from not swiping, from not pursuing, I find so much of that energy that goes into seeking a partner is really avoidance of growth within self, of being present to feelings that are coming up, often from when we're young, that we, you know, I find that we try to save other people from feelings we don't know how to tolerate. And so I think in that, loneliness and aloneness are two different things. Loneliness is the idea that what you seek will be found in another. But aloneness is healthy, to be alone, to have a good sense of self, to be able to sit and, you know, and not pound a bottle of wine. Not to say that pounding a bottle of wine is not a great idea sometimes, but when it is to avoid a feeling. I'm sure wine consumption has skyrocketed in the last month and a half.
Yeah, wine actually has skyrocketed. The other interesting thing is dating apps have skyrocketed as well. I saw that Match was up like 30% in time consumed during this time, and yet no one really went on a date from it. So it was really interesting how people just weren't only looking for it in the terms of going out on a date and stuff, but kind of going back to that idea that you're talking about of the loneliness, just someone for someone to chat with. The other thing I saw was that this was the biggest time where people went back to their exes and would go back and talk to them again, because it was kind of like a comfortability and a comfortable place for a lot of people. And I think people start to rationalize irrational decisions during this time with uncertainty and stuff. One of the things that's in your bio that I found really interesting was you talking about how great of a salesperson you were, how you had all these accolades and in the business space, and you were always top of the class and got these awards, and you thought you were doing so great. And then at the same time, you couldn't find success at home in your relationship. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you for doing the thorough research. I like that.
Trying to school him on that, yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah, so, you know, it's really fascinating because I had a relationship that ended, and I thought to myself, like, why am I so good at talking about everything but my feelings? Like, it wasn't a skill set issue. There was something more going on. And most of I would say almost all of my education prior to that relationship ending was looking at like, how do I get someone to switch behaviors, to switch from one product to another, to be my customer or whatever it was, and to change a behavior. And that might have even been relationally, to manipulate in order to get a behavior that made me feel safe and comfortable. And when I started to see that if I could use this skill set to teach people actually how to communicate and connect and not manipulate behavior, but rather learn how to meet each other's needs, in the essence of the writing that I wrote for the Sunday paper, I was basically saying, like, in all conversations, there are two worlds going on, two worlds that are colliding, and not always in a beautiful collision, right? Often in this sort of, and so in all conflict, both people are right, which is really a fascinating perspective to have. But it's that when you take the time to understand someone else's world, you then cultivate empathy to be able to understand why their point in that moment is actually right, as you're right too, that's an interesting thing. Would you rather be connected or right? And in the alchemizing of two stories, you have connectedness. And I think that's a fascinating perspective to start to take on, that both of us can interpret coronavirus very differently, right? Or what's going on, and both are right, but often your response makes me afraid that my response isn't valid.
Isn't that the basis for emotional leadership in a way?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, can we all have the emotional experience we're having, and mine isn't correct, but I can learn from yours. Maybe your anxiety about the experience versus my disassociation or my like casual nature about it. Maybe there is something to actually be learned from the anxiety that you're experiencing. And I might learn more about you just understanding the anxiety you have.
Right. I think that I actually just finished the book Principles by Ray Dalio. And
I've heard that's very good.
It's very in depth. There's a lot of principles. It's very thick, but he talks a lot about the main principle behind his business at Bridgewater and everything was kind of the idea meritocracy, which was that everybody's always going to be at kind of butting heads, but how do we sit around a table and let everybody have the ability to speak and to value everybody's kind of opinion and to kind of see it from an objective way rather than always knowing that you're going to kind of butt heads. And that's how he kind of made his company to where it is today, by not a hierarchy in a relationship or in the business stance, but how does everybody have their own kind of opinion and words of advice that they get to share. Another thing that I thought was really interesting was kind of you speaking on the idea of knowing what you want versus knowing what you think you want. And that's such a big thing that you help with people specifically that you work with.
Right. You talk about discerning kind of people telling you what they think they want, but you actually telling them what they actually really want.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I feel like that's the healing of codependency and also the inherited systems that patriarchy in general imparts upon us, which is that you sort of wake up, and I find like Ram Dass's work is really fascinating because he goes from this experience of being this Harvard professor in social sciences to being this LSD using, spiritual guy. And I love the language that he uses, that we wake up in one moment and we realize that we're a soul in an incarnation. And I think that that's ultimately what occurs when you realize that the majority of what we do till we're aware of it is pretty unconscious. We wonder, why do I want certain things that actually don't align with what I actually want? Why do I have certain behaviors that are unhealthy, hurt other people, hurt myself? Obviously, from a conscious space, we wouldn't choose that. And that's that beautiful world of being able to separate, what is it that I was taught that was valid, that makes sense? And what is the stuff that I've taught? Because you see this a lot in sort of, not to pick on anything, but let's say like extreme Christianity that is afraid of gay marriage, that all of a sudden it affects their life in no way that someone might marry someone that they love. But because it threatens the underlying belief system, it causes us to cling tighter to the identity. Because if you accept that one thing might not be true in any aspect of identity, it doesn't matter what it is, then now you have to be open that many things might not be true. And I think that's a really fascinating pull. Again, the same experience.
Right.
Can all positions be correct at the same time? That's such an interesting, it requires the dissolution of ego.
Yeah. What are you finding, Mark? What are you finding when people are coming to you now? Are they coming with different questions, different needs, different desires because they're at home? They might be without their professional identity. Do you find that the questions and the desires and the anxiety to be different?
Yeah, I find that if our relationships were struggling prior to COVID, they're probably really struggling now because, we might use our workplace as a place of avoiding truths at home.
Yeah.
And, I've always really struggled with that term. I'm sure we've all heard it, this idea of work-life balance. And I really don't believe in it because it sort of gives this idea that there's a trade-off, that there's a trade-off, that if you do one, you lose the other. And if you do the other, you lose the other, that they can't coexist. But really, life is life. Everything that's within your life it requires synergy, rather, if that makes sense. That, like, is your work giving you energy or taking it away? Is your home giving you energy or taking it away? And I think when we are left to nothing, like we can't go escape and find our worth in our work, that who are we when we're at home and there's all these truths, all these unresolved conflicts that we haven't been paying attention to. And I think, it's like people who have really beautiful baseline connections are probably more connected right now. And people who have not unresolved conflicts are probably, that's like a magnifying glass now. So it's sometimes hard to find the gift in that part,
Right.
But to me,
but are you finding people reaching out in a more anxious way? Are they looking for something that they weren't looking for from you 2 months ago?
Yeah, they're looking to how to escape and date right now. That's for sure the one thing. And they're also looking to how do I, there's like a guilt for needing to tolerate their partner right now. But it's so healthy to need individual time and individuation and to have your own, like you can't go to a room and put on some headphones and do your own thing. There's like a guilt to, do I still love them even though I don't want to be around them right now? But of course, those two things have to coexist. I think we've all probably experienced relationships where we've completely lost ourselves. And so it's terrifying at the idea of doing that. Did that make sense? Did I answer the question?
Totally. Yeah, because I hear a lot of people going like, all of a sudden I'm in a room or I'm in an apartment with somebody that I have been with for a long time, but I haven't been with for a long time.
Yeah, right? All of a sudden the magnifying glass is there of like, gosh, I kind of forgot about us. I think that's a thing too, where we forget. We take each other for granted. We forget.
And this can apply also whether you're in a relationship or not. Can apply to your relationship with your kids. This relationship, if you find yourself at home with parents, if you find yourself at home with kids. Do you think the things you teach in terms of a relationship, maybe for Patrick and his girlfriend, also apply for parenting or in terms of relationships with your friends?
Yeah, I've certainly found a renewed connection to a lot of friendships that, I didn't prioritize. To say I didn't have time is really, I hadn't prioritized. And so I found a renewed connection in that. So there's certainly that. The side of, does it benefit in terms of children and all that? Yeah, because, I'm not a parent, so, as they say, you give the best parenting advice till you have kids. So I'm going to put that caveat in there. I have a dog, if that counts in any way.
That counts.
So I think I said before that we often have a hard time. We try to save people from feelings that we're not comfortable sitting in. I see that a lot in parenting, that we try to save our children from sitting in aloneness, from being bored, or from experiencing discomfort. And so we try to save them from that. I think the pathway to all relational success is getting to know oneself. Because when you do that and what you value, then you know that you're living in integrity with your values. You know that you're operating at your best ability in terms of communication. You know what is your trigger versus what is their trigger. And then you also learn, when you cultivate a compassion and understanding for your own pain, you then can hold compassion and understanding for someone else's. You won't expect them to do it for you. And that's a whole different place to come from is, do I seek relationships so someone else can heal me? Or am I doing healing work and getting the evidence and the depth of intimacy from doing that with someone else, if that makes sense?
Yes, beautiful.
How do you approach a lot of people in here, I'm sure, have friends or have friends that are in relationships and maybe in toxic relationships or relationships they think are kind of hindering the person from being themselves, or you know, especially in our age, you know, a lot of people kind of see that. What kind of advice do you give to people to approach someone else? Because it's such a little bit of a wonky space of how do you tell someone else, man, I don't think that you're living to your potential right now. Hey, I think this relationship is not suiting you best, etc.
Well, what a challenging place to be in, to tell your friend, you know, something like that. Or even your significant other, that you're feeling disconnected and it's not fulfilling. I have a friend who once told me that the relationship I was in when I was younger was not a good one. I remember he said to me, I asked myself, would I want you to tell me this if I was you? And what I loved is that he put truth ahead of friendship. Like, he put the risk that he might lose me as a friend. I might get angry with him for the truth that he shared. But instead, I saw the courageous act that he made by just doing that. And I think in the way to approach people is, we have to, one, recognize that their response to the truth doesn't mean that we shouldn't have shared it. You know, that's, we often, right? And when we're faced with truths that are shameful for us, like we're in an abusive relationship, we're in an unhealthy relationship, we're out of integrity and our friends are calling us out on that, usually the shame of that truth causes us to want to push people away. So you'll see people in toxic relationships often totally disassociate from their friends who tell them the truth. And often also that's a sign and a red flag of a toxic relationship, is the person is trying to isolate the person from the groups and the friends. So the healing of anyone else, and this is the healing of codependency, this is the healing of dating an addict, someone who's angry, someone who's abusive, is never trying to fix them. It's only ever sharing what you know to be true about the experience and who they're being, but it's your own healing always. It's always turning within and protecting ourselves. Like, you remember that show Intervention? Yeah, I'm not sure if it's like just a Canadian phenomenon, so I always have to be mindful of that. Our television's different, not quite as good. But in that, it was always this beautiful declaration of love and commitment to what they valued, but not enabling anymore. And that's true of everything. It's like, I'm not going to enable or continue to have the same conversation with a friend who's in a toxic relationship. I'm going to say I love you and I stand for you and for your worth, but I can't support what you're doing anymore.
That's beautifully put. We should mention that you have several free courses that are up now, Mark, that people can join if you're struggling with boundaries, if you're struggling with your own self-acceptance and self-healing. You can go on. Mark has free courses that you can take that are like 7 days, right?
That
one is, Relationships 101.
Relationships 101.
I actually have one more question before you go. Just curious, because I know in your kind of bio and about you work with people not only in the relationships, but also business leaders and people that are in the business field and community as well, which I do. I work with a lot of business people, and we're seeing, obviously, with small business to large business owners, people are really struggling. Yes. And, you know, whether that's a brick and mortar store or not, people are going through kind of unprecedented times. How are you talking with kind of business leaders right now and kind of guiding them through this time, or making sure that they kind of keep a certain mindset and optimism?
You know, it's so easy to go, and I heard this a lot when COVID was first occurring, as people be like, what's the gift in the experience? And I think there's two things that need to occur. One is the acknowledgement of the struggle that's really real. I think if we're not already seeing it, we're going to see the decimation of a lot of the middle class, a lot of small business, large business, as you were saying. And I know that the different stimulus packages depend on where you live and what country you're in. But the thing that I can always hold true, at least within myself too, is there's always something greater unfolding, and that's really hard to cling to. As leaders, we need to maintain what I like to call like a fulcrum, a reference point of calmness, of groundedness. And that only comes from inner groundedness, that only comes from inner knowing. You know, we're all experiencing what is currently happening in such different ways and different levels of privilege and intersectionality. So, you know, like I have friends who work for restaurants who've been let go. I have friends who own restaurants that are closed now for good. And one of my friends said yesterday to me, who owns a furniture business, he said, I've always wanted to do something different, so maybe this is the opportunity for that. Right. And so I think the real, as much as you can, is to hold space for the actual grief that's occurring for employees, for leaders, for other people. And also at the same time, inviting them to the potential of possibility, but not trying to push them into the optimism yet, because then we bypass the grief and the transformation that occurs between any ending and any beginning. We're sort of like in two positions at the exact same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's like when someone tells you something they're going through that they're hurting, and we say, oh, it's fine. Like, wait till the silver lining, you know, and in doing that, we invalidate the actual experience at the time.
I really like that. I like seeing business leaders, you know, kind of the grief, holding space for the grief of their dream. Like you're saying that you work for a restaurant, people who own the restaurant. Everybody's being affected by this, depending where you're coming from it. We're doing it collectively and then also very much individually.
Yeah, we're in this space where I was reading that, I don't know if you've seen that, that essay that went viral on coronavirus by Charles, I forget his last name, but it's fantastic. And he said, if there's one thing we've noticed is how quickly we can mobilize when we actually need to. Like, it wasn't a month ago that the idea of ending air travel would have been preposterous. And how much when we have to, humans can group together and build community. And it's no matter where you live or where you come from or what, anything, we're all connected by COVID, which is a really fascinating gift in the pain, which is none of us can escape the reality that COVID is reminding us of our mortality.
Yeah.
But when you face mortality, you face freedom. There's nothing to fear anymore. And I think that's one of the ultimate gifts of this.
I love that somebody just said we should have a worldwide day of mourning, because everybody is having, which I thought is actually a beautiful idea. Actually, everybody has such a complicated relationship with grief. I've written quite a bit about that. But if we had a collective day and everybody could mourn, like we have my youngest son, you know, was about to graduate, so they've canceled his graduation, all his friends, the whole end of his senior year. For him, that's the biggest thing in their life, right? That's it. Other people have canceled weddings, the biggest thing in their life. Other people been fired and find themselves filing for unemployment. That's the biggest thing in their life. So everybody is having this giant mourning idea. I actually, somebody, Stacy, on mourning our old lives, and many people here asking for the course. I want to reiterate it again. It's on your Instagram account. You can go,
it's in the link.
It's on the link, and it you just go, you swipe up. I've swiped up.
It's not swiping left to right. It's swiping up.
Yeah,
swiping up. And then left and right after.
But, finally, I just want to ask you, because a couple people on here have said, well, what is your take on kind of the rise in domestic violence? Mark, I don't know if you have an opinion about that. Have you seen any of that in your own community, people reaching out about that?
Yeah, you know, I've seen a lot of that in the news. I haven't necessarily received any direct messages about it, but I've definitely seen it in the news. And it, you know, people are at their wits' end. They're at their most stressed. People deal with uncertainty differently. And if you've already, likely if there's an increase in domestic violence, there was already an indication of emotional violence or emotional abuse. Yeah. So there is support in order to, you know, there's many support systems depending on where we live to reach out and have people navigate us out of that. Because the only tolerance of that is no tolerance at all. That's a zero tolerance policy. And no matter how stressed we are, and I think that's what's fascinating about being pushed to the edge of everything is, like, you know, we can all be great meditators when we're sitting on a mountain in the Himalayas, but like, who are you when you're stressed, when we're at the edge, when we're faced with scarcity, when we're in fear? And this is a real test to, I think, our fortitude and to we're learning to increase our tolerance for uncertainty. And you know, what I do know for sure is that everything beautiful comes from the edge of uncertainty. Everything transformational comes from our tolerance for uncertainty. Because everything that is certain, and you know how a moment's going to work out, you've already lived, you know, and this requires our growth and our expansion. None of us have ever done this before. And that's a really interesting thing to see. Who will we be when this is over, if that's even a thing? I don't even know.
Yes, I think that's a great thing to leave it with. And I think a great way to find out who you are is to take Mark's course and to follow him. Gives you a sense of who you are. And only then can you really think about who you want to be, once you kind of accept who you are, and then you know what you want to shift or, you know, adjust, so to speak. So we want to thank you so much. You're doing really great work, I have to say.
Thank you.
I read everything you do, and I listen to you, and I think it's really inspiring, and you're very blunt, which I like.
Not everyone loves that, but I appreciate that you do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's great.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I hope to continue to connect with you, and hopefully one day we'll meet in person, and we'll continue to follow and watch your stuff.
Vancouver.
Oh, I love Vancouver.
Yeah, come up to Vancouver, Canada. I'll be waiting.
I need another job up there. I worked up there for a few months, so
you can go without a job. You see, you can just.
Yeah, you can go visit.
Yeah,
you can hike.
Right now I can't, but
yeah, now you can. When all this is cleared, we'll have a good non-COVID reunion.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Create the love. That's
the love. That's his tag. Create the love.
love. Well, thank you for everybody for watching. For all of Mark's followers that came and watched us. I'm Patrick Schwarzenegger.
And I'm Maria Shriver, and we are home together. We're still home together, and we've tried to do interviews with people from all walks of life, people who are in the medical profession, people who are in the nonprofit space, people who are starting nonprofits, people who are out raising money, trying to make a difference. We're calling this the helpers, the healers, the cultivators of hope. And we wanted to do one on relationships, because so many people are at home finding themselves in a relationship, renewing their relationship, being frustrated with their relationship, having to, or discovering that their relationship is better than they even thought it was. I've talked to a couple people actually who said, you know, made me reaffirm that I'm really blessed and that I'm really happy in my relationship. So there's all kinds of discoveries going on.
Yes, there really are, in many different ways. A lot of discoveries.
I'm fascinated with the idea that dating apps are up, even though nobody's going on a dating app.
It's really amazing to see.
Maybe that's just kind of
I think something to do, connection with people.
Yes.
Maybe everyone's planning for a big date when this is all over.
I bet that's what's happening. And I want to do a shout out. There was a Special Olympics athlete on here and saying all the time, can you do a shout out to a Special Olympic athlete? And I didn't get a chance to see his or her name. So I want to do a shout out to that Special Olympic athlete and all Special Olympic athletes that are out there around the world, and their parents and their coaches and everybody who volunteers in Special Olympics. If you're here, you're awesome. You're awesome.
Y'all are awesome. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Us.
We will see you tomorrow once again.
Amen. Okay. You should talk to Patricia Heaton. That's a good idea. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.